Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow morning, and for the first time in your life, you see yourself with absolute clarity. Not the version you present to the world, not the story you've been telling yourself for years, but the raw, unfiltered truth of who you actually are. Every mask falls away. Every lie you've whispered to yourself dissolves. And in that moment of terrifying honesty, you realize something that shakes you to your core. You've been living someone else's life. The job you chose because it looked impressive. The relationships you maintained because walking away felt too painful. The dreams you abandoned because they seemed impractical. The anger you swallowed. The words you never spoke. The parts of yourself you buried so deep you forgot they existed. All of it. A carefully constructed performance designed to keep you safe, accepted, loved. But here's the paradox that haunts every human existence. In trying to become acceptable to the world, you became a stranger to yourself. Today we embark on a journey into the human soul through the eyes of one of the greatest explorers of inner reality, Carl Jung. His ideas not only changed psychology, but also redefine the very meaning of existence. In this video, you'll discover how Jung's insights can help you understand who you truly are, what drives your behavior, and how to find meaning in a seemingly chaotic world. And stay until the end, because the final revelation may completely transform the way you understand life itself. Before we dive in, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Leave your like and share this video with anyone who's searching for something deeper. Because what we're about to explore goes beyond psychology. It touches the mystery of being alive. Carl Jung was not merely a psychologist. He was a visionary. He dared to look into the darkest corners of the human mind and found light there. To him, life was not a random sequence of events, but a profound journey of the soul towards self-realization, a process he called individuation. Now ask yourself this: when was the last time you made a choice that was truly yours? Not influenced by what your parents expected, what society demanded, what your friends would think, or what fear whispered in your ear. When did you last act from the deepest core of your being? From that place inside you that knows without thinking, that feels without permission? For most people, the answer is unsettling. Because we've been taught that survival means adaptation, that success means conformity, that maturity means silencing the wild, untamed parts of ourselves that refuse to fit into neat categories. But what if everything you've been taught about living is backwards? What if the very strategies you've used to build your life are the same ones slowly suffocating your soul? What if the anxiety gnawing at you in the middle of the night, the emptiness that follows your achievements, the relationships that feel hollow despite all the right words being said, what if all of it is your psyche screaming that you've wandered too far from home? This is where Jung's vision becomes not just interesting, but vital. Because Jung understood something that most never grasp. Your life is not your own until you reclaim it from the invisible forces shaping it. And those forces aren't out there, they're in here, buried in the unmapped territories of your own unconscious mind. Every time you feel inexplicably drawn to certain people, every time you sabotage your own happiness, every time you repeat patterns you swore you'd break, you're not being weak or foolish. You're being controlled by parts of yourself you've never met. Think about the person who keeps choosing partners who hurt them. Think about the brilliant mind that never finishes anything. Think about the soul who achieves everything and feels nothing. These aren't character flaws. They're symptoms of a deeper fracture, a disconnection between who you believe you are and who you actually are. And this fracture, Jung would tell you, isn't accidental. It's universal. It's the human condition itself. Because here's what nobody wants to admit. You are not one person. You are a multitude. A walking civil war between light and shadow. Between the face you show the world and the truth you hide even from yourself. Between the conscious mind that thinks it's in control and the unconscious depths that actually determine your destiny. And until you face this civil war, until you descend into those depths and meet what lives there, you will remain a puppet dancing to invisible strings. So the question isn't whether you'll take this journey inward. The question is whether you'll do it consciously, with courage and intention, or whether life will drag you there through crisis, breakdown, and suffering. Because one way or another, Jung believed, the unconscious will have its say. It will force you to listen through symptoms you can't ignore through depression that won't lift, anxiety that has no name, dreams that disturb your sleep, and coincidences too meaningful to dismiss. Your soul is trying to tell you something. The question is, Are you finally ready to listen? Here's the truth most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You don't know yourself. Not really. You know the story you've constructed, the narrative you've rehearsed so many times it feels like fact. But beneath that story lies an entire universe of impulses, desires, fears, and potentials you've never acknowledged. And this ignorance isn't innocent. It's the source of almost every form of suffering you experience. Jung called this hidden realm the unconscious, but he didn't mean it the way Freud did, as some dark basement where you store shameful memories and forbidden desires. No, Jung saw the unconscious as something far more profound and terrifying, an intelligent, purposeful force that holds more wisdom than your conscious mind could ever possess. It's the part of you that dreams in symbols, that sends you messages through slips of the tongue, that arranges coincidences so perfect they seem orchestrated by some cosmic intelligence, and it's been trying to get your attention your entire life. But why don't we listen? Why do we remain strangers to ourselves? The answer lies in what Jung called the persona, the mask we construct to navigate the social world. From the moment you're born, you're taught which parts of yourself are acceptable and which must be hidden. Your parents reward certain behaviors and punish others. Society tells you what a good person, a successful person, a normal person looks like. And slowly, carefully, you begin to sculpt yourself into something that will be loved, accepted, valued. The problem is that every time you choose the mask over the truth, every time you silence an inconvenient emotion or bury an unacceptable desire, you don't destroy that part of yourself. You exile it. You cast it into the shadow, that dark twin that follows you everywhere, growing stronger with every denial. And here's what Jung understood, that most never will. What you refuse to own in yourself doesn't disappear. It controls you from the darkness. This is why you find yourself inexplicably angry at people who remind you of something you've denied in yourself. This is why you're drawn to partners who embody the very qualities you've repressed. This is why you sabotage your own success when it threatens to expose parts of yourself you've sworn don't exist. The shadow doesn't just influence your life, it authors entire chapters when you're not looking. Nietzsche saw this same pattern and called it resentment, the poison that builds when we turn our backs on our own nature. When we call our weakness virtue and our fear wisdom. He watched as entire civilizations constructed elaborate moral systems designed not to elevate humanity, but to make people feel comfortable with their own smallness. And Jung, reading Nietzsche in his youth, understood that this wasn't just philosophy, it was psychology. The death of God that Nietzsche proclaimed wasn't happening out there in churches and temples. It was happening inside individual souls who had lost connection to their own depths. Schopenhauer warned us that we are driven by a blind will we don't understand, that our rational explanations for our behavior are elaborate fictions we tell ourselves after the fact. Jung took this insight further. Yes, we're driven by forces beyond conscious control, but these forces aren't blind. They're trying to lead us somewhere. Every symptom, every compulsion, every recurring dream is the unconscious attempting to restore balance, to force integration, to make you whole. But wholeness is precisely what terrifies us, because wholeness means acknowledging that you contain not just light but darkness, not just love but hatred, not just generosity but selfishness, not just the saint but the monster. Jung's revolutionary insight was that the goal of human development isn't to become purely good, it's to become completely real. And becoming real means facing what you've been running from since childhood. This is the hidden problem at the heart of modern life. We've been taught to pursue happiness, success, and self-improvement, but never wholeness. We're encouraged to develop our strengths and hide our weaknesses, to present our best selves and conceal our worst. The entire structure of contemporary society, from social media to corporate culture to therapeutic approaches focused solely on positive thinking, is designed to help us perfect our personas while ignoring our shadows. And we wonder why depression and anxiety are epidemic, why people report feeling more isolated despite being more connected, why success so often feels empty. You cannot heal what you will not face. You cannot integrate what you refuse to see. And until you turn and look at what lives in your own darkness, you will remain divided against yourself, a house at war, exhausting yourself in the effort to maintain an illusion of unity. The cost of living unconsciously isn't dramatic. That's what makes it so insidious. You don't wake up one day having lost everything. Instead, you wake up having lost yourself so gradually, so imperceptibly that you can't even remember when the erosion began. You look in the mirror and see someone who checks all the boxes, someone who should be satisfied, and yet there's an emptiness so vast it echoes. This is what Jung called the crisis of meaning, and it's the defining affliction of our age. We've become experts at building lives that look impressive from the outside while feeling hollow from within. We accumulate achievements like armor, hoping that if we just accomplish enough, acquire enough, become enough in the eyes of others, we'll finally feel that sense of rightness we've been chasing. But the emptiness persists. And here's why. You cannot fill a void in being with having. You cannot resolve an identity crisis with external validation. The unconscious doesn't care about your resume. It doesn't care how many followers you have or how much money you make. It cares about one thing only: whether you're living in alignment with your deepest truth. And when you're not, when you're playing a role instead of being yourself, it begins to rebel. At first, the rebellion is subtle. You feel restless for no clear reason. You're irritable, distracted, plagued by a vague sense that something is wrong even though nothing specific is broken. You tell yourself you're stressed, that you need a vacation, that you'll feel better once this project ends or that problem resolves. But the discomfort doesn't go away because it's not about your circumstances. It's about the growing distance between who you are and who you're pretending to be. And if you continue ignoring it, the unconscious escalates. Anxiety becomes your constant companion. Sleep becomes elusive. You develop mysterious physical symptoms, headaches, digestive issues, chronic pain that no doctor can fully explain. These aren't psychosomatic in the dismissive sense. They're psychosomatic in the literal sense. Your psyche is speaking through your body because you've stopped listening to it any other way. This is what modern psychology has rediscovered and given names to: cognitive dissonance, the exhausting mental friction of holding contradictory beliefs; confirmation bias, the desperate need to see only information that supports the story you've already committed to; the neuroscience of self-deception, showing how the brain literally creates blind spots to protect us from truths we're not ready to face. But Jung saw all of this decades before the brain scans and the clinical studies. He understood that the psyche has its own intelligence, its own immune system that attacks whatever threatens the persona's stability. And here's the truly devastating part. The people closest to you often reinforce your unconsciousness. Your family has invested in the version of you they think they know. Your friends have formed relationships with your mask, not your face. Your colleagues depend on you playing your assigned role. So when you begin to question, when you start feeling that something fundamental needs to change, you'll encounter resistance not from enemies, but from everyone who benefits from you staying asleep. This is what Sartre meant by bad faith, the lie we tell ourselves to avoid the terrifying responsibility of freedom. It's easier to believe you have no choice, that circumstances forced your hand, that you're trapped by obligations and expectations. Because if you admitted you have choice, you'd have to confront the fact that you've been choosing this imprisonment, that every day you don't speak, your truth is a day you choose silence, that every relationship you maintain out of guilt or fear is one you're actively selecting. The weight of that responsibility can feel unbearable. So most people don't bear it. They construct elaborate justifications for their own captivity. They point to mortgages, to children's needs, to aging parents, to economic realities, all legitimate concerns that become excuses for never asking the deeper question: is this life mine, or am I living someone else's unlived life? Jung noticed a pattern in his patients. The ones who suffered most weren't those who had faced external tragedies, but those who had betrayed their own nature. They were people who had chosen safety over truth, approval over authenticity, comfort over growth. And the price? They became strangers to themselves, unable to access their own intuition, creativity, or joy. They moved through life like sleepwalkers, performing routines that had long ago lost meaning. Worse, they often became unconscious agents of the very forces that imprisoned them, pressuring their own children to choose practical over passionate, criticizing friends who dared to break free, defending systems that crush individual souls in the name of collective stability. This is how unconsciousness perpetuates itself across generations. The unlived life of the parent becomes the haunting inheritance of the child. The dreams you abandon don't vanish. They become ghosts that your children will either fulfill or flee from. The shadow you refuse to face doesn't disappear. It gets projected onto your spouse, your colleagues, your world. And the cycle continues, each generation adding layers of denial until someone finally has the courage to stop and ask, what have we been running from all this time? So, how do you break free from a prison you've spent your entire life building? How do you dismantle the carefully constructed fortress of your persona without losing yourself completely in the process? Jung's answer is both simple and terrifying. You must turn toward what you've been running from. You must descend into your own depths and meet what lives there. This is the process Jung called individuation, the journey of becoming who you actually are rather than who you think you should be. And it begins not with addition, but with subtraction. Not with becoming more, but with unbecoming everything false. You don't find your true self by adding new layers. You find it by peeling away the accumulated masks, the inherited beliefs, the borrowed dreams, the fears disguised as wisdom. The first step is radical honesty, and this is where most people fail before they even begin. Because radical honesty doesn't mean confessing your sins or sharing your feelings. It means looking at yourself without the protective filter of justification. It means asking questions you've been avoiding. Why do I really stay in this relationship? What am I actually afraid of? What parts of myself have I disowned to be loved? When was the last time I made a choice that was mine alone, untainted by others' expectations? These questions are surgical. They cut through decades of self-deception in seconds. And the answers, when you're finally brave enough to hear them, will disturb you. You'll discover that the story you've been telling yourself about your life is fiction. That the reasons you give for your choices are rationalizations invented after the fact. That you've been lying not just to others but to yourself. And the lies have become so familiar they feel like truth. Jung insisted that this confrontation with the shadow is not optional. It's the price of consciousness. And here's what makes it revolutionary. When you finally acknowledge your shadow, when you admit to the jealousy you've denied, the rage you've suppressed, the selfishness you've concealed, something unexpected happens. The power these qualities had over you begins to dissolve. What you own loses its ability to possess you. Think about the person who spends their life projecting superiority, always subtly letting others know they're more enlightened, more evolved, more conscious. Underneath that, performance lives a terror of inadequacy, so profound they can't look at it directly. But the moment they admit, yes, I'm deeply insecure, and I've been using spiritual superiority to hide it, the compulsion loosens. The shadow, once acknowledged, stops running the show from behind the curtain. This is what Frankl discovered in the concentration camps. The last human freedom is the ability to choose your attitude in any given set of circumstances, but you cannot choose consciously until you see clearly. You cannot exercise freedom while invisible forces pull your strings. The work of individuation is the work of illuminating those strings, naming those forces, and choosing, perhaps for the first time, how you want to respond to your own life. But here's where Jung parts ways with most therapeutic approaches. He doesn't believe the goal is to eliminate the shadow or transcend your wounds. The goal is integration. You don't kill the monster in your psyche. You befriend it. You don't overcome your darkness. You incorporate it consciously into your wholeness. Because that darkness contains power, raw, vital, creative power that you've been wasting in the effort to keep it contained. Consider the person who has denied their anger their entire life, who prides themselves on always being nice, accommodating, understanding. They think they're good, but they're actually empty. They have no boundaries, no fire, no capacity to defend what matters. The day they reclaim their anger not to become cruel, but to have access to its protective power, they become whole in a way they've never been. They can finally say no. They can finally stand up for themselves. They can finally stop betraying themselves to keep the peace. This is the rebellion Jung calls for. Not against society, not against others, but against your own falseness. It's the courage to disappoint people who love your mask but don't know your face. It's the willingness to let relationships end if they require you to remain small. It's the radical act of choosing authenticity over approval, even when authenticity costs you everything you've used to define success. And yes, there will be losses. When you stop playing the role others expect, some people will leave. When you set boundaries that protect your truth, you'll be called selfish. When you pursue what matters to you rather than what looks impressive, you'll face judgment. But here's what Jung understood. You can lose everything external and still have yourself, but if you lose yourself to keep everything external, you have nothing. You're a costume without a person inside. The path of individuation is narrow and lonely at times, but it's the only path to genuine peace. Because peace doesn't come from having no conflict, it comes from having no inner war. It comes from the alignment between your inside and your outside, between your truth and your actions, between your soul and your life. Now we arrive at the deepest truth, the one that Jung spent his entire life circling, the revelation that changes not just how you see yourself, but how you see existence itself. And it's this: you are not separate from life. You are not a small, isolated consciousness trapped inside a bag of skin, struggling to survive in an indifferent universe. You are the universe becoming conscious of itself. You are life looking back at itself through human eyes. This isn't poetic metaphor, this is the final destination of the individuation journey. When you descend deep enough into your own psyche, when you move past the persona, past the shadow, past even the personal unconscious with all its memories and wounds, you arrive at something Jung called the collective unconscious. And here, in this deepest layer, you discover something that shatters the illusion of separation. The same patterns, the same symbols, the same archetypal stories that live in you also live in every human who has ever existed. The hero's journey you feel called to isn't yours alone, it's humanity's journey. The mother archetype that shapes your relationships isn't personal history. It's ancient, primordial, the same force that has moved through human experience since the beginning. The wise old man who appears in your dreams isn't a random image, it's the same guide that appeared to seekers and mystics across every culture and era. You are not an isolated fragment. You are a unique expression of something vast and eternal. Jung discovered this, not through theory, but through direct experience. During his own crisis, what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, he began to have visions and dreams filled with symbols he'd never studied. Ancient images, mythological figures, geometric patterns that later he found in texts from civilizations he'd never encountered. How was this possible unless there was something deeper than personal memory? Something shared, something that connected all human consciousness at a level beneath culture and time. This is where psychology touches the mystical, where science meets the sacred. Because what Jung realized is that the self, that divine spark at the center of your being, is not separate from what mystics have called God, what philosophers have called the absolute, what physicists now call the unified field. It's all different languages pointing to the same truth. There is one consciousness expressing itself through infinite forms. And you are one of those forms, temporarily forgetting your true nature, so you can experience the adventure of remembering. Think about what this means. Every person you meet is another version of you, wearing a different mask, living a different story, but animated by the same essential consciousness. When you hurt another, you hurt yourself. When you see another clearly, you see yourself. When you love another deeply, you love the divine expressing itself in form. This isn't abstract philosophy, this is the lived experience of someone who has completed the journey of individuation. They no longer feel separate. They no longer experience themselves as isolated. They recognize their face in every face. And here's what makes this revelation so powerful. When you realize you are not separate from life, fear begins to dissolve. Because what is there to fear when you understand that you are not this small, vulnerable ego, but vast consciousness temporarily focused through this particular perspective? Death loses its terror because you recognize that what you truly are cannot die. Failure loses its shame because you understand that there's nowhere to fall. You're already the ground. Loss becomes bearable because you see that nothing is truly lost, only transformed. This is why Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not the person your parents wanted, not the person society expected, not even the person you thought you should be, but the self, that eternal witness that has been watching through your eyes since you first opened them, that will be watching when you close them for the last time, that was never born and will never die. But, and this is crucial, this realization doesn't make you detached or indifferent to life. It makes you more present, more engaged, more alive than you've ever been. Because now you're not living from fear. You're not accumulating experiences to fill a void or prove your worth. You're living from fullness, from joy, from the sheer wonder of consciousness exploring itself. Every moment becomes sacred not because you're trying to make it meaningful, but because you recognize that meaning is what you are. Jung watched countless people wake up to this truth, usually through crisis. The death of a loved one that breaks open their heart, the collapse of everything they built that forces them to see what remains. The dark night of the soul where every familiar identity dissolves and they're left with nothing but the bare fact of their own existence. And in that nothing, they discover everything. They realize that what they feared losing was never real, and what they truly are can never be threatened. This is the secret that sages and mystics have whispered across millennia, that quantum physicists are now rediscovering, that every human who goes deep enough eventually encounters. Separation is illusion. Division is dream. The truth is wholeness, unity, consciousness recognizing itself in infinite disguises. And suffering, all suffering, comes from forgetting this truth, from believing the illusion, from thinking you are this small separate thing that must fight to survive in a hostile world. But you are not small. You are not separate. You are the entire ocean contained in a single drop, as Jung loved to say. Every quality exists within you. Every possibility lives in your depths. The saint and the sinner, the coward and the hero, the fool and the sage, all of them are you. And the work of a lifetime is not to become something you're not, but to consciously embrace everything you are. So here, at the end of this journey, you're left with a choice. You can close this moment and return to sleep, to the comfortable illusion that you're just a person trying to get through life, accumulating moments until it's over. Or you can wake up. You can begin the real work, not tomorrow, not when circumstances are right, but now. You can turn toward your own depths with courage and curiosity. You can befriend your shadow, question your persona, listen to your dreams, pay attention to the synchronicities that life keeps sending you. You can stop living like you're separate from everything and start living like you're connected to everything. Stop waiting for permission to be yourself and start claiming the life that only you can live. Stop betraying your soul to please the world and start honoring the truth that whispers in your quietest moments. Because Jung's final message is this: your life is not an accident. Your struggles are not meaningless. Your wounds are not just scars, they're portals. Everything you've experienced, every joy and every agony, has been preparing you for this moment of awakening. The moment you realize that the meaning you've been searching for isn't somewhere else, in some achievement or relationship or spiritual experience. It's here, now, in the simple fact of your own consciousness. You are the answer to the question you've been asking. You are the home you've been seeking. You are already whole, you just forgot. And remembering, that moment when you see yourself clearly for the first time, when you recognize your true face beyond all masks, that is the purpose of human existence. That is what Jung meant by individuation. That is why you're alive. So the question isn't, what is the meaning of life? The question is, will you have the courage to live your life so completely, so consciously, that you become meaning itself?